For 30 years she endured the insults in silence,
The racist jokes.
the deliberate disrespect, the way they treated her like she was invisible, despite her decades of service. Dorothy Williams, 68 years old, had learned to keep her head down and her mouth shut. But on March 15, 2025, when her supervisor grabbed her throat and squeezed, calling her the most vile racist slur imaginable, something extraordinary happened. The man's hand began to burn, not from Dorothy's resistance, she hadn't moved, but from a presence that suddenly filled the room. A carpenter from Nazareth, who had walked with the oppressed for 2,000 years, had finally had enough. And what happened next would force an entire hospital to confront the racism they pretended didn't exist. Dorothy Williams had been a nurse at Sacred Heart Hospital in Chicago for 32 years. 32 years of excellence. 32 years of perfect patient care. 32 years of being overlooked, dismissed, and disrespected because of the color of her skin. She was 68 years old now, born in 1957 in Birmingham, Alabama. She had been a child during the Civil Rights Movement, old enough to remember the fear in her mother's eyes when the news showed police dogs attacking peaceful protesters, old enough to understand why her mother, Beatrice, who worked as a maid for white families, came home exhausted every night, not just from work, but from the constant humiliation of being treated as less than human. Dorothy had moved to Chicago in 1975, believing the North would be different. It was different in some ways. The racism was quieter, more subtle, hidden behind professional smiles and polite language, but it was still there, always there, like a low hum you learned to ignore because acknowledging it would drive you insane. She had worked her way through nursing school while cleaning offices at night, earned her RN license in 1980, started at Sacred Heart in 1993 as a nurse's aide, then gradually moved up to registered nurse. She was good at her job. Better than good. Patients requested her specifically. She had a gift for making people feel cared for treating each person with dignity regardless of who they were. But despite her skills, despite her perfect record, despite 32 years of dedicated service, Dorothy had never been promoted beyond floor nurse, had never been considered for management positions, had watched younger, less experienced white nurses leap past her on the career ladder, had sat through countless meetings where her medical opinions were ignored until a white colleague repeated the exact same thing, at which point suddenly it became a good idea. She endured it because she had to. She had a granddaughter, Aaliyah, studying pre-med at Northwestern. Dorothy was helping pay her tuition. Aaliyah was going to be a doctor, was going to have opportunities Dorothy never had. That dream kept Dorothy going through every indignity, every microaggression, every moment of being made to feel invisible. On March 15, 2025, Dorothy woke at 4:30 a.m. like always. Her small South Side apartment was cold despite the rattling radiator. Her body ached from decades of physical labor. Arthritis made her hands stiff. Her knees protested as she got out of bed. But she got ready for work anyway, put on her scrubs, ate her simple breakfast, caught the 5:45 bus to the hospital. She arrived at Sacred Heart at 6:15 for her 7 a.m. shift. The hospital was a large facility serving a wealthy, predominantly white neighborhood on Chicago's North Side. Dorothy changed in the locker room, greeting the few colleagues who acknowledged her existence. Most didn't. After 32 years, she was still the black nurse, not Dorothy, not a person with a name and a story. The morning shift started routinely. Dorothy made rounds on the fourth-floor post-surgical unit, administering medications, checking vitals, changing dressings, comforting anxious patients. This was the part she loved. When it was just her and patients, race didn't matter, pain didn't discriminate, fear didn't have a color. In those moments, Dorothy was just a skilled healer doing what she did best. But at 9 a.m. came the mandatory staff meeting. Dorothy's stomach tightened as she entered the conference room. These meetings were always difficult, always a reminder that in professional spaces, her voice didn't matter. The meeting was led by Dr. Brandon Mitchell, the new hospital administrator, hired 6 months ago. Brandon was 35, impossibly handsome with styled blonde hair and teeth, so white they looked artificial. He'd gone to Yale for undergrad, Harvard Medical School, came from a wealthy Connecticut family. He wore $1,000 suits and spoke with the casual confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Brandon was also, Dorothy had quickly learned, deeply racist. not in obvious ways. He never used slurs in public. But the way he looked at Dorothy and other staff of color, the way he dismissed their concerns, the decisions he made that always disadvantaged them, it was clear. And sometimes, when he thought no one important was listening, his true feelings slipped out. The meeting was about budget cuts, staff reductions. Brandon stood at the front, clicking through slides with that trademark smirk. "We need to increase efficiency," he announced. "Do more with less. Some positions will be eliminated." Dorothy raised her hand before she could stop herself. She knew better. Knew it would only make things worse, but she couldn't stay silent. Not when she knew what efficiency meant for patient care. "Dr. Mitchell," she said when he reluctantly called on her, "reducing nursing staff on post-surgical floors will harm patient outcomes. We're already stretched thin. Research clearly shows adequate nursing ratios save lives." "Thank you, Dorothy," Brandon interrupted with exaggerated patience, like he was speaking to a slow child. "But I think those of us with actual medical degrees can handle the decision-making." The room went silent. Several nurses looked uncomfortable. A few white doctors smirked. Dorothy felt heat rise in her face, but kept her voice steady. "I have 32 years of frontline nursing experience, Dr. Mitchell. I've seen what happens when staffing drops below safe levels, and I have an MD from Harvard and an MBA. Brandon cut her off again, his smile turning cold. "So perhaps defer to expertise here, unless you have something actually constructive to add." The word constructive landed like a slap. Dorothy's decades of experience weren't constructive. Her knowledge of patient care wasn't constructive. Her voice wasn't constructive, because in Brandon Mitchell's world, nothing a black woman said could be constructive. Dorothy sat back, face burning with humiliation. Around the table, most people looked away. Embarrassed for her, maybe, or embarrassed to witness this. But no one spoke up. No one challenged Brandon's dismissal. They never did. After the meeting, Dorothy returned to her floor, blinking back angry tears. She'd been through this before, would go through it again. Just had to endure. Just had to survive until retirement in 3 years. 3 more years, and she'd have her full pension. Could help Aaliyah finish medical school. Could finally rest. But today was going to be different. Around 2 p.m., Dorothy went to the supply room to restock medication carts for the evening shift. It was a small windowless room at the end of the corridor. She preferred working alone. Alone, she didn't have to perform the exhausting dance of being professional while absorbing disrespect. She was reaching for supplies on a high shelf when she heard the door open behind her. "Working hard, Dorothy, or hardly working?" Her stomach dropped. "Brandon Mitchell." Dorothy turned slowly. Brandon stood in the doorway, arms crossed, that familiar smirk on his face. He stepped inside and closed the door. The click of the lock echoed like a gunshot. "Dr. Mitchell," Dorothy said carefully, "can I help you?" "You embarrassed me today," Brandon said quietly, but rage simmered underneath. "Questioned me in front of my staff. I was advocating for patient safety," Dorothy replied, backing up until shelves pressed against her spine. "I didn't mean any disrespect. Didn't mean any disrespect." Brandon laughed without humor. "You people always say that right before you're disrespectful. You know your problem, Dorothy. You don't know your place." There it was, the mask slipping. "My place." Dorothy kept her voice steady despite her racing heart. "I'm a registered nurse with 32 years of experience. My place is advocating for patients." "Your place," Brandon hissed, moving closer until he was inches from her face, "is keeping your mouth shut and doing what you're told. I don't care how long you've been here. When I make a decision, you accept it. Do you understand?" Dorothy looked him directly in the eyes. She was so tired. Tired of bowing her head. Tired of accepting this. Tired of silence. "No," she said quietly. "I don't understand. Because what you're describing isn't professional. It's you trying to intimidate me into silence. And I won't be silent anymore. If you're making decisions that harm patients, I will speak up. That's my job." Brandon's face turned red, his jaw clenched, then his hand shot out and grabbed her throat. The grip was sudden and brutal, cutting off her air. Dorothy's hands flew up instinctively, trying to pry his fingers away, but Brandon was much stronger. He squeezed harder, pushing her against the shelving. Metal dug painfully into her back. "You listen to me," he snarled. And then he said it. The word, the vilest racial slur imaginable, spoken with such hatred that Dorothy felt something break inside her. He called her that word while choking her, his face twisted with rage, spittle flying from his mouth. Dorothy couldn't breathe. Black spots danced across her vision. This was it. She was going to die in this supply room, killed by a racist, and no one would care. Just another black woman, whose life didn't matter. She closed her eyes and prayed. Jesus, she whispered in her mind, unable to speak. Jesus, if you see me, if you see women like me, if you care, please, please help me. And then something impossible happened. Brandon's hand suddenly jerked back as if burned. He gasped, stumbling backward, staring at his palm in shock and agony. There was no visible injury, but he cradled his hand like it had been thrust into fire. What the? He started, but the words died. The temperature plummeted. Dorothy could see her breath misting in the suddenly arctic air. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly, and then the locked door swung open. A man stepped through, not walked, stepped, as if he'd materialized from nothing. He was tall with shoulder-length dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore simple clothes, plain white shirt, dark pants, unremarkable, but something about him made the air vibrate with power. His eyes, deep brown and filled with compassion and fury simultaneously, locked onto Brandon. "Let her go," the stranger said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but carried absolute authority. Now, Brandon had already released Dorothy, but couldn't look away from this newcomer. "Who are you? This is private property. You can't. I can go anywhere," the stranger said. Then his eyes shifted to Dorothy, who was gasping for air, one hand on her bruised throat. His expression softened immediately. "Dorothy Williams, daughter of Beatrice, granddaughter of Sarah, who was born a slave but died free. I've been watching you your whole life, and I am so proud of you." Dorothy's legs gave out. The stranger moved faster than possible, and caught her gently, easing her to the floor. His hands radiated warmth that spread through her body like sunlight. "Who are you?" Dorothy whispered, though somewhere deep down she already knew. The stranger smiled, and that smile held such love that tears sprang to Dorothy's eyes. "You know who I am, Dorothy. I'm the one you called, the one who has walked with your people through every trial, every injustice. I'm Jesus, and I'm here because you needed me." Dorothy stared. This couldn't be real, had to be hallucination from oxygen deprivation. Jesus Christ couldn't actually be in a supply room at Sacred Heart Hospital, but looking into his eyes, she knew. This was real. He was real, and he had come for her. You're really," she couldn't finish. "I'm really here," Jesus confirmed. He turned to Brandon, who stood frozen against the far wall. "Brandon Charles Mitchell. Born into privilege, given every advantage, and you use your power to destroy people who can't fight back. Do you think I don't see? Do you think I don't care? This is insane," Brandon stammered. "You're just some crazy person. I'm calling security. You tried to kill her," Jesus said quietly, and though he made no threatening moves, Brandon flinched. "Maybe you would have stopped before it was too late. Maybe not. But in your heart, you wanted her dead, because she dared to be competent while black. She dared to speak truth while black. She dared to exist while black, and you couldn't tolerate that. I didn't. I wasn't." Brandon's voice shook. "Don't lie to me," Jesus said with such sorrow it was worse than anger. "I know every thought you've ever had, every hateful word you've spoken, every cruel action you've taken. And I'm giving you one chance, Brandon. One opportunity to see what you've become, and choose to change." Jesus reached out and touched Brandon's forehead. Brandon's eyes went wide. He made a strangled sound and collapsed to his knees. Whatever he was seeing, it was breaking him. His face contorted in horror. "No," he whispered. "No, that's not. I'm not. That's exactly what you are," Jesus said quietly. "That's what hatred makes you. What racism turns you into. Is that who you want to be forever?" Brandon was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook his whole body. "I'm sorry, God. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You did know," Jesus corrected gently. "You chose not to care." He turned back to Dorothy, examining her throat carefully. Where his fingers touched, pain vanished. Bruises faded, breathing came easy. When Dorothy touched her neck, the damage was completely gone. "How did you?" she started. "I made you," Jesus said simply. "I know every cell. Healing you is as easy as breathing." He helped her stand, his grip strong and steady. "Dorothy Williams, you have endured so much, and I want you to know that every moment of suffering, I was there. Every insult I felt, every indignity, I bore with you. You are not invisible to me. You have never been invisible to me. Dorothy's tears flowed freely. Then why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you make it better? I've prayed my whole life and nothing changes. Things do change, Jesus said softly, slowly, too slowly. But they change because people like you refuse to give up. You think your prayers went unanswered, Dorothy. But I've been answering them in ways you couldn't see. Every patient you saved, every nurse you mentored, every moment of dignity you maintained in the face of hatred. That was me, working through you, changing the world one act of love at a time. But he almost killed me, Dorothy whispered, glancing at Brandon, still on his knees, face buried in his hands. But I came, Jesus said firmly, because you called, and I always come when my children call. Always, even when you can't see me, I'm always there. He walked to Brandon and knelt beside him. Brandon, look at me. Brandon raised his head slowly. His face was streaked with tears, eyes red and swollen. He looked nothing like the arrogant administrator from 20 minutes ago. He looked shattered. I hate what I saw, Brandon whispered. I hate what I am inside. I know, Jesus said, but self-hatred won't fix anything. Now comes the hard part. Now you have to choose real change, every single day, for the rest of your life. Can you do that? I don't know if I can, Brandon admitted. You can't, Jesus said bluntly. Not alone, that's why I'm here, but you have to want it. You have to choose it daily. Your friends will think you're crazy. Society will tell you your racism was normal. But if you follow me, if you let me transform your heart, you can become someone entirely different. Someone who uses privilege to lift others up, instead of crushing them down. Brandon looked at Dorothy. I'm so sorry. What I did is unforgivable. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. Part of her wanted to rage at him, wanted him destroyed. But then she looked at Jesus, watching her with such hope, and she remembered her mother. Her grandmother who survived slavery, and still believed in grace. Every sermon about loving enemies, and forgiving those who persecute you. It went against every instinct, every justified anger. But Dorothy had spent her life following Jesus, and if he was here saying redemption was possible even for Brandon, who was she to argue? I forgive you, she said quietly. The words felt like pulling teeth. I don't trust you. I don't like you. You have a long way to go. But I forgive you because that's what Jesus would want, and because holding on to hatred poisons me more than it hurts you. Brandon broke down sobbing again. Jesus stood, placed a hand on his shoulder, then walked back to Dorothy. Your faith amazes me, he said. Your strength humbles me. Your capacity for grace is exactly why I came to earth. To show that love is always stronger than hate. Always. You've been teaching that lesson your whole life, Dorothy. That's your legacy. My legacy is being treated like garbage for 68 years, Dorothy said bitterly. No, Jesus said firmly. Your legacy is remaining kind anyway. Your legacy is Aaliyah, who will become a brilliant doctor because you believed in her. Your legacy is every patient you comforted, every nurse you trained, every moment of grace you showed to people who didn't deserve it. That's what will be remembered. The door burst open. Maria, the young Filipino nurse, stood there with security guards. She'd heard commotion, worried about Dorothy. Dorothy, are you okay? Maria stopped short, seeing the strange scene. Brandon on his knees, Dorothy standing by Jesus, nothing making sense. Jesus smiled at Maria. Your friend is fine, better than fine. She's free. He turned back to Dorothy. My work here is just beginning, but I wanted you to know personally that you matter to me. Your life has purpose. Every prayer has been heard. Change is coming. Real change. Not just in Brandon, but in this hospital, this city, this world. Because people like you refuse to give up, refuse to hate, refuse to stop being light in darkness. Wait, Dorothy said as Jesus moved toward the door. Don't go. I have so many questions. Jesus paused, looking back with infinite tenderness. I'm not going anywhere, Dorothy. I'm always with you. You just saw me today in a way you could touch and hear, but I've been beside you every single day of your life, and I'll be there every day that's left. You're never alone. Remember that. He walked into the corridor. Maria and the guards stepped aside automatically. By the time Dorothy followed, Jesus had vanished, gone as if he'd never been there. Except Brandon Mitchell was still on his knees weeping. Dorothy's throat was perfectly healed, and something fundamental had shifted in the universe. Maria grabbed Dorothy's arm. What just happened? Who was that man? I need to sit down, Dorothy said, exhausted. I need to process this, because I'm not sure I believe it myself. But she did believe it. Deep in her soul, Dorothy Williams knew Jesus Christ had walked into a hospital supply room and saved her life, had validated her suffering, had promised her struggles matter, and after 32 years of enduring racism, after 68 years of fighting to be seen as human, Dorothy Williams finally felt like she could breathe. The question was, what happened next? How would the hospital react? How would Brandon's transformation unfold? And what did Jesus mean when he said real change was coming? Dorothy was about to find out that divine intervention doesn't end with a miracle. It begins with one. Within 30 minutes, the entire fourth floor of Sacred Heart Hospital knew something extraordinary had happened in the supply room. Within an hour, rumors had spread throughout the entire building. Within 2 hours, hospital administration was in emergency session trying to figure out what to do about Dr. Brandon Mitchell, who was still sitting on the floor of that supply room, refusing to move, crying uncontrollably, and claiming he'd had a divine encounter. Dorothy sat in the staff break room with Maria beside her, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Security had questioned her briefly. She'd told them the truth. Dr. Mitchell had attacked her. Someone had intervened. She was fine now. She didn't mention who the someone was, didn't mention the miracle, didn't mention Jesus walking through a locked door. They wouldn't have believed her anyway. But Maria knew something impossible had happened. She'd seen Dorothy's face, seen the peace radiating from her despite the trauma, seen the way the air in that supply room had felt charged with something beyond explanation. You can tell me, Maria said quietly. I won't think you're crazy. Dorothy looked at her, this kind young woman who had always treated her with respect. You'll think I'm crazy. Try me. Dorothy took a deep breath. That man who was there, the one who saved me, that was Jesus Christ. Maria didn't laugh, didn't look skeptical. She just nodded slowly. I believe you. Just like that. I'm Catholic, Maria said. Raised in Manila. My grandmother used to tell stories about miracles, about times when God intervened directly in human affairs. I always believed those stories were real, and when I walked into that room, I felt something holy, something that made every hair on my body stand up. That was God's presence, wasn't it? Yes, Dorothy whispered. That was God. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maria asked the question Dorothy had been avoiding. What happens now? To Dr. Mitchell? To you? To all of us? I don't know, Dorothy admitted. Jesus said change was coming, real change, but I don't know what that means. Down the hall in the supply room, Brandon Mitchell was discovering what change meant. He couldn't stop crying, couldn't stop seeing what Jesus had shown him when he touched his forehead. It had been like watching a movie of his entire life, but from outside himself, watching every moment of cruelty, every racist thought, every time he'd used his power to hurt instead of heal. But worse than that, Jesus had shown Brandon what he was becoming, where this path led. He'd seen himself 10 years in the future, more bitter, more hateful, more consumed by racism and cruelty. He'd seen himself destroying careers, ruining lives, maybe even killing someone. He'd seen the monster he was turning into. And then Jesus had shown him something else, an alternate future, who Brandon could become if he chose differently. A man who used his privilege to lift others up. A man who fought against injustice instead of perpetuating it. A man who saw every human being as infinitely valuable, regardless of skin color. The contrast between those two futures had shattered something inside Brandon. Every justification he'd ever made for his behavior crumbled. Every rationalization turned to dust. He couldn't hide from the truth anymore. He was a racist. He had been a racist his entire life, and if he didn't change completely, he would die a racist and face judgment for every person he'd harmed. The door opened. Brandon looked up, expecting security or administration. Instead, he saw his assistant director, Dr. Vanessa Chen, an Asian American woman he'd also treated with barely concealed contempt for months. Brandon, she said quietly, we need to talk. I know, Brandon said, his voice hoarse from crying. I know what you're going to say. That I'm fired, that I should be arrested for assault, that I'm a monster, and you're right, you're absolutely right about all of it. Vanessa closed the door and sat on the floor across from him, which surprised Brandon. He'd expected anger, accusations, triumph at seeing him brought low. Instead, her expression was complicated, cautious but curious. What happened in here? She asked. Dorothy won't give details. Security found you having some kind of breakdown, and the entire staff is saying you tried to strangle her. I did, Brandon admitted. The words felt like glass in his throat. I grabbed her throat, called her. He couldn't even say the word now. Called her a terrible name. I wanted to hurt her, Vanessa, maybe even kill her, because she dared to question me, because she's black and I'm white, and some sick part of me thought that gave me the right to. He broke down again. Vanessa was quiet for a long moment. So why are you still here? Why haven't you run? Why are you sitting on the floor crying instead of calling lawyers and trying to cover this up? Because someone stopped me, Brandon said. Someone who showed me what I really am, who gave me a chance to change. And I'm sitting here trying to figure out if I'm brave enough to take that chance, or if I'm too much of a coward. Who stopped you? Brandon looked at her. You're going to think I'm insane. I already think you're insane for attacking a nurse in a supply room. So try me. Jesus Christ, Brandon said. Like actually Jesus. He appeared in this room, touched me, showed me my entire life, showed me what I'm becoming, and told me I could change if I chose to. That's who stopped me. Vanessa stared at him. Brandon waited for the laughter, the skepticism, the call to psychiatric services, but Vanessa surprised him again. I believe you, she said quietly. What? I believe you, she repeated. Not because I understand it, not because it makes sense, but because something happened in this hospital today that can't be explained medically or rationally. Dorothy's throat should be covered in bruises, she should be in the ER, but she's fine, completely fine. And you're a different person than you were this morning. I can see it in your eyes. So either you had a complete psychotic break, or something miraculous happened, and I choose to believe in miracles. Brandon felt fresh tears coming. Why? Why would you believe me? I've been terrible to you too. All those times I dismissed your ideas, interrupted you in meetings, made you feel small. I did that deliberately, because some racist part of me thought Asian people were supposed to be quiet and obedient. I'm so sorry, Vanessa. I'm so desperately sorry. I know you are, Vanessa said. I can see it. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help you. Not because you deserve it. You don't. But because if Jesus Christ actually appeared in this hospital and gave you a chance to change, then who am I to interfere with divine intervention? What do you mean help me? There's going to be an investigation, Vanessa explained. Dorothy has every right to press charges. The hospital will want to fire you immediately to avoid liability. Your career is over, Brandon. At least your career as it existed. But maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe you need a completely different path. I don't understand. Vanessa stood and extended her hand to help him up. Come with me. There's someone you need to meet. Someone who might be able to help you figure out what comes next. Brandon took her hand and stood on shaky legs. His body felt like it had been through a war. His mind was still reeling from everything Jesus had shown him. But he followed Vanessa out of the supply room and down the corridor. They walked through the hospital, and Brandon noticed something he'd never paid attention to before. The way staff members looked at him, not with respect, as he'd always assumed, but with fear, with resentment, with barely concealed anger. How had he never seen it? How had he convinced himself he was well liked when the truth was written all over their faces? Because you only saw what you wanted to see, a voice said in his mind. Not Jesus this time, just his own conscience finally awake after years of sleep. Vanessa led him to a small office on the second floor. The nameplate read Dr. Michael Patterson, hospital chaplain. She knocked and a deep voice called, "Come in." The chaplain was a black man in his 60s, with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore casual clothes, khakis, and a sweater, not clerical robes. When he saw Brandon, recognition flickered across his face. "Dr. Mitchell," he said neutrally. "I heard there was an incident today." "Father Patterson," Brandon started, but the chaplain held up a hand. "Just Michael is fine. I'm not Catholic. Baptist minister actually. Been hospital chaplain here for 15 years. He gestured to chairs. "Sit down, both of you." They sat. Brandon felt like a child called to the principal's office, except this was infinitely worse because this man knew what Brandon had done. "I need to tell you something," Brandon said, the words tumbling out. "I attacked Dorothy Williams today, grabbed her throat, said terrible things to her, things I can't even repeat. I was ready to kill her, and then," he paused, unsure how to continue, "and then Jesus appeared," Michael said calmly. Brandon's head snapped up. "How did you? Dorothy came to see me 20 minutes ago," Michael explained. "Told me everything, asked me if she was losing her mind. I assured her she wasn't. I've been praying for years for God to intervene in the racism at this hospital, praying for something to shake people awake. Seems like today those prayers were answered." "You believe her?" Brandon asked. "Just like that?" "I've been a pastor for 40 years, Michael said. I've seen things that can't be explained except by divine intervention. And I know Dorothy Williams, known her for a decade. She's not given to flights of fancy or delusions. If she says Jesus appeared in that supply room, then Jesus appeared in that supply room. The question now is, what are you going to do about it? I don't know, Brandon admitted. I want to change. God, I want to change so badly. But I don't know how. I don't know where to start. I don't even know if it's possible. Michael leaned forward. It's possible, but it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. Because real change, Brandon, doesn't happen overnight. It's not a switch you flip. It's a daily choice made over and over, for the rest of your life. You're going to have to examine every thought, every impulse, every reaction. You're going to have to unlearn everything you were taught about race and power and privilege. You're going to lose friends. Your family might reject you. Society is going to tell you you're overreacting, being too sensitive, betraying your race. But if you're serious about following Jesus, none of that can stop you. How do I start? Brandon asked desperately. First, Michael said, you resign from your position. Immediately. You can't stay in a leadership role at this hospital. Not after what you did. Not after what you've been doing for months. Brandon nodded. He'd already known this. His career at Sacred Heart was over. Second, Michael continued, you turn yourself in. You attack Dorothy. That's a crime. You face the legal consequences without fighting them. I'll go to jail, Brandon said quietly. Maybe, Michael agreed. Maybe not. Depends on whether Dorothy presses charges, what the DA decides. But you accept whatever comes. No expensive lawyers trying to get you off. No using your privilege to escape accountability. You face what you did. Brandon's hands were shaking. The thought of jail terrified him. But Jesus had shown him that future where he became a monster. If jail was what it took to avoid that future, so be it. Third, Michael said, you do the work. Real work. Therapy. Education about racism and its impacts. Listening to people of color without defending yourself. Learning history you were never taught. Reading books that make you uncomfortable. Sitting with your guilt without making it about you. It's going to hurt, Brandon. It's going to feel like dying, because in a way it is. The person you were has to die so someone new can be born. How long? Brandon asked. How long until I'm different? Michael smiled sadly. The rest of your life. You'll never be done. There's no finish line where you get to say I'm not racist anymore, but you can become someone who actively fights racism, someone who uses whatever privilege you still have to lift others up. Someone who spends the rest of his days trying to repair even a fraction of the harm you've caused. I want that, Brandon said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. I want to be that person. Then let's start right now, Michael said. He stood and walked to his desk, pulling out a piece of paper and a pen. Write your resignation letter. Then we're going to walk to administration and you're going to submit it. After that, we're going to find Dorothy, and you're going to face her. Really face her. And accept whatever she needs to say to you. And then we're going to go to the police station together. Brandon took the pen with trembling hands and began to write. It took him 20 minutes to find the right words. He wrote about his failures, his racism, his attack on Dorothy. He didn't make excuses or minimize what he'd done. He simply told the truth and tendered his resignation effective immediately. When he finished, Michael read it over and nodded. Good. Now comes the hard part. They walked together to the administrative wing. Word had already spread about the incident, and Brandon could feel eyes on him as they moved through the corridors. Hostile eyes. Angry eyes. Good, he thought. They should be angry. I deserve their anger. The chief operating officer, Patricia Henderson, met them in her office. She was a stern woman in her 50s, who had always treated Brandon with professional courtesy. That courtesy was gone now. Her face was ice. Dr. Mitchell, she said coldly, I was about to summon you. We have a serious situation to discuss. I know, Brandon said. He handed her the resignation letter. I've written my resignation, effective immediately. Patricia read it, her expression unchanging. When she finished, she looked up at him. This doesn't protect you from legal consequences. We're still obligated to report the assault to authorities. And Dorothy Williams has every right to pursue criminal charges. I know, Brandon repeated. I'm not trying to escape consequences. I'm accepting them. That's why I'm going to the police station after this, to turn myself in. Patricia looked surprised. You are? Yes, I attacked a colleague. I'm a criminal. I need to face justice for what I've done. Patricia exchanged a glance with Michael, who nodded confirmation. Well, she said finally, that's unexpected. Most people in your position would be calling lawyers and trying to spin this. I'm done spinning, Brandon said. I'm done lying to myself and others. What I did was evil. I was evil, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become someone different. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. You're serious? Yes. What changed? This morning you were, well, you were the person who attacked a nurse. Now you're this. What happened? Brandon glanced at Michael, who gave a slight nod of permission. I had an encounter with Jesus Christ. Literally. He appeared in that supply room, showed me what I was becoming, gave me a chance to change, and I'm taking that chance. Patricia stared at him. She was a practical woman, not particularly religious, but she was also smart enough to recognize when someone was telling the truth, however impossible that truth seemed. All right, she said slowly. Your resignation is accepted. Clean out your office by end of day. I'll have security escort you. And Dr. Mitchell, if this is real, if you really are trying to change, then actually do it. Don't just feel guilty for a few weeks and then go back to who you were. The world doesn't need more white men who feel momentarily bad about racism. It needs white men who actually fight it. I will, Brandon promised. For the rest of my life I will. They left Patricia's office and walked toward Dorothy's floor. Brandon's heart pounded harder with each step. What would he say to her? How could he possibly apologize for trying to kill her? How could he ask for forgiveness for decades of racism? You can't, he realized. There are no words adequate for this. All you can do is face her and accept whatever she needs from you. They found Dorothy in the break room, still sitting with Maria. When she saw Brandon enter with Michael, she stiffened. Maria immediately moved to stand between them, protective. It's okay, Maria, Michael said gently. Brandon came to talk. But Dorothy, you don't have to listen if you don't want to. You don't owe him anything. Dorothy looked at Brandon for a long moment. He looked different than he had this morning. The arrogance was gone. The cruel smirk was gone. In their place was something raw and broken and desperate. Let him speak, Dorothy said quietly. I want to hear what he has to say. Brandon knelt, actually knelt on the floor in front of Dorothy, which shocked everyone in the room. He looked up at her with tears streaming down his face. I don't have words that are good enough, he began. Nothing I say can undo what I did to you. What I've been doing to you and everyone like you for my entire life. I was raised in racism. I absorbed it like air, and I never questioned it, never examined it, never examined it, never thought about the pain I was causing. I just used my privilege as a weapon against people who couldn't fight back. Dorothy listened silently, her face unreadable. I tried to kill you today, Brandon continued. I had my hand around your throat and I wanted you dead. Because you're black and I'm white, and some sick evil part of me thought that gave me the right to hurt you, and I would have killed you if Jesus hadn't stopped me. Jesus did stop you, Dorothy said softly. He saved my life. He saved my soul, Brandon replied. Showed me what I was becoming, where this path leads. And I'm terrified, Dorothy. I'm terrified because I saw how close I was to being beyond redemption. How close I was to becoming a monster who destroys lives without remorse. And the only thing stopping me from that future is making different choices every day for the rest of my life. Why are you telling me this? Dorothy asked. What do you want from me? Nothing, Brandon said immediately. I don't want anything from you. You've already given me more than I deserve by choosing to forgive me. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know that you won. That your courage to speak up, to refuse to accept my abuse, to call on Jesus when you needed help, all of that mattered. You saved yourself, and in doing so you might have saved me too. Dorothy was crying now though, whether from pain or relief or something else, Brandon couldn't tell. I don't know if I can trust you, she said. I forgave you because Jesus asked me, but forgiveness isn't the same as trust. Trust has to be earned. I know, Brandon said. And I'm not asking for your trust. I'm just asking for you to believe that I'm going to try, really try, to become someone different, someone who fights against the evil I used to embody. Dorothy looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. Then she looked back at Brandon. Okay, she said finally. I'll believe you're trying. But Brandon, if you fail, if you fall back into old patterns, if this turns out to be just guilt that fades with time, you're going to have to live with knowing you had a divine encounter and wasted it. That's between you and God. I won't waste it, Brandon promised. I swear to God I won't waste it. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Brandon stood and turned to Michael. I'm ready. Let's go to the police station. Wait, Dorothy said. Brandon turned back. I'm not pressing charges. Brandon stared at her. What? Why not? Because Jesus told me that change was coming, Dorothy explained. Real change. Not just in you but in this whole system. And if you're in jail, you can't be part of that change. You can't use your privilege to fight racism if you're locked away. So I'm choosing to let you be free, to give you the chance to become who you're supposed to be. Don't make me regret that choice. Brandon felt his legs go weak. This woman whom he had tried to murder was giving him grace he didn't deserve, was choosing mercy when she had every right to demand justice. I won't, he managed to say. I promise you I won't. Good, Dorothy said. She stood and walked over to him. Up close Brandon could see the strength in her eyes, the dignity that decades of racism had failed to break. Now get out of here. You have work to do. And so do I. Brandon nodded and left with Michael. As they walked through the hospital corridors one last time, Brandon thought about Jesus's words. That change was coming. Real change. He didn't know exactly what that looked like yet, didn't know his role in it, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. His old life was over, and whatever came next he would spend it fighting the racism he had once embodied, because Jesus had given him a second chance, and Brandon Mitchell was not going to waste it. But the story was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. Because when God intervenes in human affairs, the ripples spread far beyond one moment in one supply room. They spread through families, communities, institutions, even entire cities. And Sacred Heart Hospital was about to discover that divine intervention comes with divine expectations. Jesus had saved Dorothy and transformed Brandon. But he wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. 3 months after Jesus appeared in the supply room at Sacred Heart Hospital, the ripples of that divine intervention were still spreading in ways no one could have predicted. Dorothy Williams stood in front of a conference room filled with hospital administrators, board members, and department heads. She was presenting the new nursing protocols she'd designed, protocols that prioritized patient dignity and eliminated racial disparities in pain management. 6 months ago, no one would have listened to her. Today, every person in the room was taking notes. She had been promoted to Director of Nursing Education with a salary that finally reflected her expertise. But more importantly, her voice mattered now. People listened when she spoke. Her decades of experience were finally valued. As she concluded her presentation, Patricia Henderson, the hospital's COO, stood and began clapping. The entire room joined in. Dorothy felt tears prick her eyes but held them back. She'd cried enough. Now was the time for action. After the meeting, Dorothy walked through the hospital corridors with her head held high. She passed the supply room where it had all happened and paused. The room looked ordinary now. Just metal shelves and medical supplies. But Dorothy would never see it as ordinary. That room was where she'd almost died. Where she'd called on Jesus. Where everything changed. Still think about it. Dorothy turned to see Dr. Vanessa Chen approaching with a warm smile. Vanessa had become a true friend over the past 3 months, working alongside Dorothy to implement real changes at Sacred Heart. Every day, Dorothy admitted, sometimes I wonder if it really happened or if my oxygen-deprived brain just created a beautiful hallucination. It happened, Vanessa said firmly. I've seen too much change to doubt it. Brandon Mitchell doesn't transform overnight without divine intervention. This hospital doesn't suddenly care about racism without something shaking us awake. Jesus was here, Dorothy. And he's still working. They walked together toward the cafeteria. Along the way, staff members greeted Dorothy by name. Not the black nurse anymore. Not invisible anymore. Dorothy. A person. A valued colleague. A leader. In the cafeteria, they found Maria sitting with several other nurses. a diverse group that included Keisha Johnson, the young black nursing student who had been in Dorothy's class when Jesus appeared the second time. Miss Williams. Keisha jumped up excitedly. I got my first clinical placement, pediatric ICU, and the supervisor specifically requested me because she heard about your training methods. Dorothy hugged her. That's wonderful, honey. You're going to be excellent. I'm going to try to be like you. Keisha said. Excellence in the face of adversity. Grace under pressure. All of it. Just be yourself. Dorothy corrected gently. I spent too many years trying to be perfect to prove I was worthy of respect. You don't have to prove anything, Keisha. You're already worthy. Just be competent and compassionate. That's enough. They sat down together and the conversation flowed easily. This was new too. Sitting with colleagues who actually wanted her company, who valued her perspective, who saw her as human. Maria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and smiled. Brandon just texted. He's speaking at a medical school this afternoon about confronting racism in healthcare. He wants to know if you'll come, Dorothy. Dorothy hesitated. She'd seen Brandon several times since the incident. He was genuinely trying to change, working with therapists, reading books about racism, volunteering at community clinics. But it was still complicated. Forgiveness didn't erase the memory of his hands around her throat. I'll go, she decided. He's doing the work. I should support that. 2 hours later, Dorothy sat in the back of a medical school auditorium watching Brandon Mitchell address 200 future doctors. He looked different than he had 3 months ago. Thinner. Older somehow. The easy confidence was gone, replaced by humility that came from being broken and rebuilt. 3 months ago, Brandon told the students, I was a racist, not the hood-wearing slur-shouting kind that's easy to identify and condemn. I was the sophisticated kind. The kind who never thought of himself as racist. I had black colleagues and told myself that meant I wasn't prejudiced. But when a black woman questioned my authority, I tried to kill her. The auditorium was silent. Brandon's vulnerability was uncomfortable to witness, but it was real. I grabbed Dorothy Williams by the throat and called her. He paused, his voice breaking. I called her a word I won't repeat. A word designed to dehumanize. To reduce a brilliant nurse with 3 decades of experience to nothing but her skin color. And in that moment I fully intended to hurt her. Maybe kill her. He wiped his eyes. Then Jesus Christ appeared in that room. Physically appeared. I know how that sounds. I know you think I'm crazy or having a breakdown. But it happened. He touched me and showed me what I was becoming. A monster consumed by hatred. And he gave me a choice. Stay on that path or choose transformation. Brandon looked directly at the audience. I chose transformation. But let me be clear. It's not a one-time choice. It's a choice I make every single day. Every morning I wake up and have to consciously reject the racist thoughts my culture programmed into me. Every interaction with a person of color requires me to check my biases. It's exhausting. It's painful. And it never ends. A white male student raised his hand. So you're saying we're all racist? That seems extreme. If you grew up in America, Brandon said bluntly, you absorbed racist ideas. That's not your fault. You didn't create the system. But what you do with that knowledge is your choice. You can deny it and keep perpetuating harm. Or you can acknowledge it and start doing the work to change. But I don't see color. Another student protested. I treat everyone the same. Brandon shook his head. That's exactly the problem. When you don't see color, you don't see the different experiences people have because of their color. You don't see that black patients are systematically undertreated for pain. You don't see that black mothers die in childbirth at 3 times the rate of white mothers. You don't see the racism baked into every system, including healthcare. A black female student in the front row spoke up. What about us, the students of color who are tired of educating white people about racism, who are exhausted from constantly having to prove we belong here? Brandon nodded. You shouldn't have to educate us. That's not your job. White people need to educate ourselves. Read books, listen to podcasts, do the work. And to students of color, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every microaggression you've experienced. Every time you've been made to feel less than. Every moment you've had to work twice as hard to be seen as half as good. You deserve better. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to create that better world. The black student looked skeptical. Words are easy. What are you actually doing? Fair question, Brandon said. I resigned from my position at Sacred Heart. I'll never work in hospital administration again. I don't deserve that power. Instead, I volunteer at free clinics in underserved communities. I'm writing a book about confronting white privilege in healthcare. I donate most of my trust fund to organizations fighting health disparities. And I show up day after day to do the unglamorous work of dismantling the racism I used to embody. And Dorothy forgave you? The student asked. Just like that? No, Brandon said. Not just like that. She forgave me because Jesus asked her to. But forgiveness isn't trust. I haven't earned her trust. Maybe I never will. But she gave me grace I didn't deserve, and I'm trying to honor that gift by becoming someone different. After the presentation, students surrounded Brandon with questions. Dorothy watched from the back, impressed despite herself. He was doing the work, really doing it. Not performing guilt for a few weeks then returning to his old life, actually trying to change. She was about to leave when she felt it again. That presence, that shift in the air that meant Jesus was near. She turned and saw him standing by the exit, wearing the same simple clothes, that same warm smile on his face. No one else seemed to notice him. He was there for her. Dorothy walked over, her heart pounding. You came back. I never left, Jesus said gently. I've been here the whole time, Dorothy. Walking beside you, celebrating your victories, comforting you in difficult moments. You just couldn't see me. Why can I see you now? Because you need to, Jesus said. He gestured toward Brandon, still surrounded by students. Look at him. Really look. Dorothy looked. She saw Brandon patiently answering questions, showing vulnerability, admitting when he didn't know something. She saw genuine remorse, real effort to change. He's trying, Dorothy said. He's succeeding, Jesus corrected. Not perfectly. He'll make mistakes. He'll stumble. But he's not the man who attacked you anymore. That person is dead. This is someone new. Someone being reborn into truth. It's hard to trust that, Dorothy admitted. Hard to believe it's real, and not just temporary guilt. Then trust me, Jesus said. I'm the one transforming him. And I don't do halfway. Brandon Mitchell will spend the rest of his life fighting racism, not because he has to, but because he's genuinely become someone who cares. Someone who sees every person as made in my image. Dorothy felt tears coming. Why did it have to happen this way? Why did I have to almost die for things to change? Jesus' eyes filled with sorrow. Because sometimes systems are so broken that only crisis creates change. I wish it were different. I wish people listened to you for 32 years instead of ignoring you until violence forced them to pay attention. But that's the world humans have created. A world where the oppressed have to suffer before the privileged will act. Will it ever get better? Dorothy asked. Really better? Yes, Jesus said with absolute certainty. Not in your lifetime. Not completely. But it will get better. Because of people like you who refuse to give up. Because of transformed people like Brandon who use their privilege to dismantle oppression. Because of young people like Keisha who won't accept the way things are. Change is slow, Dorothy. But it's coming. He took her hands. You're going to live another 17 years. 17 beautiful years where you'll see fruit from seeds you planted. Aaliyah will become a doctor who revolutionizes maternal health care for Black women. Keisha will train a generation of nurses. Brandon will influence thousands of healthcare workers. And you, Dorothy Williams, will be remembered not as a victim but as a hero who changed an entire system. I don't feel like a hero, Dorothy whispered. I feel like someone who survived. Survival is heroic, Jesus said firmly. Maintaining dignity while being dehumanized is heroic. Choosing forgiveness when you had every right to seek revenge is heroic. Never giving up despite decades of being dismissed is heroic. You're one of my greatest warriors, Dorothy, and I'm so proud of you. Dorothy was crying openly now. Thank you, for saving me, for seeing me, for making my suffering mean something. Your suffering always meant something, Jesus said. It was never wasted. Every moment of enduring racism with grace was a testimony to the power of love over hate. Every time you refused to become bitter, you proved that evil doesn't have the final word. Every day you showed up despite being mistreated, you were teaching the world what real strength looks like. He pulled her into an embrace. I'm going to leave now, but remember I'm always with you. In every patient you care for, in every nurse you mentor, in every moment you choose love. That's where you'll find me, not just in miraculous appearances, but in the daily grind of loving people who don't love you back. That's where I live, Dorothy. In the lives of people like you. Jesus stepped back, already beginning to fade. Tell Brandon I'm proud of him too. Tell him to keep going. Tell him the road is long but he's on the right path. And tell those nursing students that they have the power to heal more than bodies, they can heal broken systems if they're brave enough. Wait, Dorothy said. Will I see you again? Before the end. Jesus smiled. You'll see me when you take your last breath. I'll be right there holding your hand, welcoming you home. And Dorothy, that home I'm preparing for you is more beautiful than you can imagine. A place where racism doesn't exist, where pain is no more, where you'll finally get the rest you've earned. And then he was gone. Dorothy stood alone in the empty hallway, feeling his presence even in his absence. She wiped her eyes, straightened her shoulders, and walked back into the auditorium. Brandon was finishing up with the last few students. When he saw Dorothy, his face lit up with hope and fear mixed together. You came, he said quietly. I did, Dorothy confirmed. And I have a message for you. Jesus says he's proud of you. Says to keep going. The road is long, but you're on the right path. Brandon's eyes filled with tears. He said that? Really? Really, Dorothy said. She surprised herself by reaching out and squeezing his arm. And I'm proud of you too, Brandon. What you're doing isn't easy. Most people wouldn't do it, but you are, and that matters. Thank you, Brandon whispered. That means more than you know. They stood together in silence for a moment. Then Dorothy said, I should get back to the hospital. But Brandon, keep doing this. Keep telling your story. Keep fighting the racism you used to embody. The world needs more people willing to admit they were wrong and change. I will, Brandon promised. Every day, for the rest of my life. Dorothy left the medical school and took the bus back to Sacred Heart. As she rode through Chicago, she thought about everything that had happened. 3 months ago, she'd been invisible, disrespected, almost murdered. Now she was a leader, a mentor, a voice for change. All because she'd called out to Jesus in her darkest moment. All because he'd answered. The bus passed Sacred Heart Hospital, and Dorothy looked at the building with new eyes. It wasn't perfect. Racism hadn't disappeared. There was still so much work to do, but it was better, significantly better. And it would keep getting better because people like her and Brandon and Keisha refused to accept injustice. That night, Dorothy video called her granddaughter Aaliyah, who was in her final year of pre-med at Northwestern. Grandma. Aaliyah's face filled the screen, radiant with youth and hope. I got my MECAT scores back, 520. I'm definitely getting into medical school. Dorothy's heart swelled with pride. Baby, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you. Aaliyah said seriously, you paid my tuition. You believed in me. You showed me what strength looks like. Grandma, I'm going to specialize in maternal fetal medicine. I'm going to fight to end the disparities that kill Black mothers. I'm going to finish the work you started. You're going to do more than I ever could, Dorothy said, crying happy tears now. You're going to save lives I couldn't save, change systems I couldn't change. And that's exactly how it should be. Each generation builds on the last. After they hung up, Dorothy sat in her small apartment feeling overwhelming gratitude. She thought about her mother Beatrice, who had cleaned houses in Alabama, about her grandmother Sarah, who had lived through Jim Crow, about her great-grandmother Ruth, who had been born enslaved. 4 generations of Black women, 4 generations of fighting, and now, finally, the 5th generation, Aaliyah, would reap the harvest of all that struggle. Dorothy closed her eyes and prayed, thank you, Jesus, for seeing me, for saving me, for making my life matter, for the 17 years you promised me. I'm going to use them well. I'm going to train nurses who will change healthcare. I'm going to support Aaliyah's dream. I'm going to keep fighting until my last breath, and then I'm coming home to rest. She felt warmth wash over her. Jesus was there, always there, walking beside her through every moment. Dorothy Williams went to bed that night, knowing 3 things with absolute certainty. She was seen, she was valued, she was loved, and armed with that knowledge she could face anything. The story of what happened at Sacred Heart Hospital spread throughout Chicago, then across the country. Some believed it was literally true, others thought it was metaphor, but everyone agreed something miraculous had occurred that changed lives. Brandon Mitchell never stopped doing the work. He became a leading voice on confronting racism in medicine. His book From Hatred to Healing, One Racist's Journey Toward Redemption, became required reading in medical schools nationwide. Dorothy Williams trained hundreds of nurses over the next 17 years. She watched Aaliyah become a doctor who reduced maternal mortality rates for Black women by 40% in Chicago. She saw Sacred Heart Hospital become a national model for equity in healthcare. She saw change ripple outward from one supply room to an entire system. And when Dorothy Williams took her final breath at age 85, surrounded by people who loved her. Jesus was there, right beside her bed, holding her hand, smiling that smile that held all the love in the universe. "Well done, good and faithful servant," he said. "Come home and rest." Dorothy opened her eyes in a place beyond pain, beyond racism, beyond struggle, and waiting for her were her mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and countless others who had fought the same fight. "You did it, baby," her mother said. "You changed the world." "No," Dorothy replied, looking at Jesus with infinite gratitude. "He changed the world. I just let him work through me." And that was the whole lesson. The entire message: one person can't change the world alone, but one person yielded to divine love can become a catalyst for transformation that echoes through eternity. That's how change happens. Not with one grand gesture, but with millions of small choices made by ordinary people who refuse to accept injustice. People like Dorothy Williams, people like Brandon Mitchell after his transformation, people like you, reading this story right now. The question is, what will you choose? The end. This story isn't just about Dorothy Williams or Brandon Mitchell. It's about every workplace in America right now, about the invisible people who endure daily microaggressions, who watch less qualified people get promoted past them, who are told their decades of experience don't matter because of the color of their skin. Dorothy survived 32 years of racism because she held on to three things: purpose, faith, and hope. She knew patience needed her. She believed God saw her suffering. She hoped for a better tomorrow. And that hope wasn't naive. It was prophetic. Because change did come. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Dorothy shouldn't have needed to survive 32 years of discrimination. Brandon shouldn't have needed Jesus to physically appear to recognize Dorothy's humanity. The system should never have been broken in the first place. Yet it was, and it still is. The most powerful moment in this story isn't when Jesus appeared. It's when Dorothy forgave. When she chose grace over vengeance. When she gave Brandon the chance to transform instead of demanding he be destroyed. That's the kind of radical love that actually changes hearts. But forgiveness doesn't mean accepting ongoing abuse. Dorothy forgave Brandon and demanded systemic change. That's the balance: extending grace while fighting for justice. Brandon's transformation shows us something crucial: people can change, not through shame or cancellation, but through divine intervention that breaks them open and rebuilds them from the inside out. Real change is painful, daily, lifelong work. Brandon will never be done fighting his own racism, but he's trying, and that matters. Jesus' message applies to all of us. Who did you see today? Who did you ignore? What will you do differently tomorrow? Those three questions, asked honestly every day, will transform you. So here's my challenge. Who is the Dorothy Williams in your life? Who's the person you walk past without seeing? The colleague you dismiss? The voice you don't hear because of bias you haven't examined? And the harder question, are you Brandon Mitchell before his transformation? Are you using privilege to maintain systems that harm others? Are you dismissing people's experiences because acknowledging them would require you to change? Jesus is still offering transformation, still asking, is this who you want to be? Still holding out the possibility that you can become someone entirely different, but you have to choose it, daily, forever. This story ended with hope. Dorothy training nurses, Aaliyah becoming a doctor, Brandon fighting racism, systems changing. But that hope requires action from all of us. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed racism in your workplace? How did you respond? Or have you been the Dorothy in your story, dismissed, overlooked, made invisible because of who you are? Drop a if this story challenged you to see differently. Share it with someone who needs this message. Subscribe for more stories about divine intervention, radical transformation, and the power of choosing love over hate.